So good evening. My name is Adara Goldberg, and I am the director of the Holocaust Resource Center and Diversity Council at Kean University. It is my pleasure to be with everybody tonight to learn from our esteemed panelists more about the Asian American and Pacific Islander experience today. And so I am going to turn things over to our partner this evening, Dr. Tamika Pollins, who is representing the Hoboken Public School District, who will moderate today's program. I would encourage everybody to please use the chat box with any questions, and we'll be sure to respond to those later on in the program. So thank you so much, and we're happy to learn from one another tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for setting aside the time to spend with us this evening. I am Dr. Tamika Pollins, and I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for the Hoboken Public Schools. And we are grateful for our continued partnership with Kean University and enjoy collaborating to curate events that serve as opportunities for learning. Tonight, I will serve as moderator, and we have the opportunity to learn and gain insight from the perspective of our panelists. At this time, we will begin by having each of our panelists introduce themselves in the following order: Dr. Sarong Kong, Joyce Simons, May Tomko, and then Jen Park.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's a great honor to join this fascinating panelist to talk about something I wish we don't need to talk, but it's very needed. And thanks for showing your interest. Looking forward to our discussion.
Good evening. Thank you to Kean University and Hoboken Public School District, Dr. Goldberg and Dr. Pollins for hosting us this evening. I am really honored to be here and to share my stories. My name is Joyce Wong Simons, and I am a proud member of the Hoboken Board of Education. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's May. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a rising junior at American University. And I'm also really excited to be here and really excited to share my perspectives. And thank you so much again for inviting me, Dr. Pollins.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jen Park, and I am a supervisor at Hoboken High School. Prior to joining the Hoboken Public School District family, I was a mathematics teacher. And I'm, again, so honored to be here to be able to share my stories and experiences with you. And I'm looking forward to this evening.
Thank you so much to you all for being here and for agreeing to be on our panel. Sadly, there has been a rise in crimes against members of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And I pose this question to all of you. How have you been processing the violence that has been happening, and how are you monitoring your own mental health and wellness? And for this question, we'll go in the order of Joyce, May, Dr. Kong, and then Jen.
So with the rise in violence towards the Asian American Pacific Islander community, I decided that however insignificant I felt that my stories were, I needed to share them. I want to contribute and bring awareness to these issues. Even my closest friends don't really hear about my experiences of these seemingly innocent racist remarks that I've experienced, but I just let go. There's a Chinese proverb that's 心静自然凉, and it means a quiet heart will naturally keep you calm and cool. So my grandparents and parents use that often. On a hot summer day, if you're calm, you'll cool down, or it translates to relationships and experiences. And work, but we are, if we don't retaliate, things will hopefully just settle down and go away. Culturally, I was taught to just let things go. Like, don't make a big deal out of it. You don't want to bring attention to yourself. So I just really felt like with the leaders and advocates in our communities telling us, let's get past that. And we need to speak up, and we need to educate by speaking and sharing. And if we don't do that, we need to educate so that xenophobia, hate, and racism will hopefully subside a little bit. And so for me, it's important to note that I actually really do feel different right now. For the first time in the 30 years that I've lived in the United States, I actually have a physical fear of everyday activities, of going for a walk. I've never considered this before. This fear is legitimate, and it's constantly on my mind. I'm worried about my friends, my family, my nieces, nephews. The other day I was driving in Hoboken, and a man who was standing in the middle of the street on the sidewalk, nowhere near my car, flips me the bird. And in this climate, my immediate thought was, is it because of my race? So thank you.
So fortunately for me, I haven't experienced anything that direct or, within the wave of COVID within the past year. I personally haven't experienced any sort of direct violence, like verbal harassment or anything. But many people I know have. And I feel like in general, kind of as Joyce was saying, like it's not really talked about. And that's why I'm really glad that we're having this panel to talk about it, especially for a lot of people who don't really know that it's happening or kind of the pain that our community is feeling. But I would say for me, how I've been like kind of processing it, the first thing, even though there's absolutely no, I guess, need to take action and it's okay to just sit and process and be with your feelings for as long as you need. The first thing that for me that I like to do is just kind of go into like the muck of it, just really try to educate people. And that happened like in 2014 with the rise of Black Lives Matter. I was just very like, this is a thing, like, just kind of something that like catalyzes like passion within you. And I feel like I haven't really stopped ever since that. But yeah, again, with the shooting that happened in March, I really, really tried to reach out to my family, extended family, friends, etc. Just really trying to put my passion and my anger into a form of education for others. And another thing that I like to do is I really try to avoid the news and also like social media, because a lot of things I follow are very like not political, but just things happening in the world. And, it can be very overwhelming as a lot of, so I just try to like take a step back or just put a limit on how long I'm consuming that kind of media and content. And I also try to do things that I enjoy, like painting and like listening to podcasts and just like being outside.
Well, I like to echo what Joyce mentioned. It's the fear, and it's a real fear. And that was a very painful moment when I realized that I finally became a target of attack in your own country. And so that was a beautiful day. I brought my kids to a playground not far from Kean. And there was a 10 years old kid followed me and say the nasty word. And that was the first time since I moved to America over 2 decades. And I have to confess, I did not know how to react. It's just a kid. But of course, now I know more because that was a turning moment. And I started to educate myself. What is race? What is racism? What is a racial problem? And I reached the realization that this culture is a little bit toxic. And then in a way, it's a shameful that you feel you live with a fear in your own country, and that has been long for Black people, but we ignored. And finally, when the moment it became like our own experience, finally we realize that's how our other friends and people suffer for longer than we do. So I think I like to put it as a painful but also awakening moment, and for myself and for more. And luckily, I'm an educator. I will not keep quiet. So from that moment on, I constantly brought a sense of knowing others, caring others, and value the interdependencies among all my students. And we're going to talk more later. Thank you.
So I think the first three speakers definitely echoed a lot of the things that I've been feeling as well. It's been very difficult to process what is happening. You know, anti-Asian racism has always existed and has never really gone away, in my opinion. Like, I've grown up experiencing it, but you know, like Joyce said, brushed it off. It's like it's normal, right? That so it was never really addressed. And I mean, luckily, none of my experiences or any. Well, my brother has had, like, you know, physical attacks against him when he was younger. Um, but now with the rise in the violent attacks, like, you know, happening more frequently, it's definitely taking a toll on like my mental and emotional health. And unlike May, I don't have the self-control to stay off social media. I'm constantly doom scrolling, and it's, you know, it's hard not to, because I'm like, I want to be aware of what's happening. But at the same time, it's definitely probably not the healthiest thing to do. But you know, I've been talking about it with my friends, and that I think they've been a great support for me and my family as well. But just so many emotions happening all the time, like, you know, just anger, frustration, sadness, but also, you know, being really grateful for the people who are out there supporting us and being allies in our community. So, I mean, it's been difficult, but also uplifting in a way to know that there are people supporting us.
Thank you all for sharing. And I just want to thank you all also for just being so open and vulnerable. You know, it's not easy to talk about a racialized experience and, you know, tell, you know, a group of strangers about, you know, your fear and your pain. So I appreciate you being open enough to allow your lived experience to be something that we can learn from. And I want to shift and I want to ask May a question, because when we are hearing about different things that are on the rise now, and you are a college student, and I'm interested in knowing from your perspective, what stereotypes have you had to combat academically and socially?
Well, actually, I talked to my school board about this earlier this week. So all the memories are very fresh, but I would definitely say the biggest one is the model minority myth. Um, you know, academic excellence, and it's mainly applied to East Asians and South Asians. Um, and given that I'm an East Asian, it was applied to me even by my own math teacher. When I came in to ask for help, he said, "Oh, like, shouldn't you be good at this?" Like, he was kind of like confused why I needed help. And like, even when I was in elementary school, like all of the other kids, and they were all white, always wanted to be with me and this other Asian kid in the group. And they would be like, "Oh, like, you'll get us a good grade, right?" Like that kind of thing. So very, very early, it was kind of instilled in me. And it just kind of made me feel like I had to live up to this image rather than kind of carve my own path and be like, "No, I'm smart, and, you know, I have experiences just because of me, not the way I look or the racialized notions that are applied to the way that people perceive me." So definitely that. And I would say the other thing is the kind of the notion that Asians don't experience racism as like, I think it was Joyce and Jin were saying, like, how it's really normalized, like, and even like in school too, like growing up, people would kind of say things like offhandedly that were very blatantly racist, but the teacher wouldn't call it out. Or like even at my college, which really prides itself on being very like liberal and open, like one of the employees like asked me, was trying to speak to me, like I couldn't speak English, like I couldn't understand. And then they told me that I was in the wrong line and was like, the rice is over there. So it really is everywhere. But yeah, I would say like just those two things, like especially the notion that Asians don't experience racism really needs to be dismantled, because it's not oppression Olympics and you can't be like, oh, like no, this group like is more oppressed than you. It's like no, like our liberation is bound together. So we have to understand like the nuances of um like with the and even within the Asian community too, how there's like so many differences between like the East Asian community versus like West Asian, Southeast Asian, etc., and like the Pacific Islander community too. So just really understanding that, but then also seeing how it manifests itself in interpersonal interaction, like, oh, where are you really from? Like, oh, you must be good at math, right? Like that kind of thing. But people don't really think of that as racist. I mean, it could just be like, oh, that's a stereotype, don't say that, but it's racist, and people don't treat it like that when it really should be.
Thank you, May. In thinking about May's experience, from the perspective of a student, there's one way that we process and we handle ourselves as adults, but for students, in the pre-K-12 space and in the university space, we're charged with protecting them, right? So if they're having any experience that would make them uncomfortable, they should be in a position where they shouldn't have fear, shouldn't think twice about coming to us from support. So I want to pose a question to Jen and Dr. Kong. How can we in the pre-K-12 and university space ensure that we're not promoting or encouraging stereotypes, whether it be directly or indirectly?
That's a great question. And I think first and foremost, people just need to educate themselves, right? I feel like a lot of these issues come from a lack of information or misinformation. And, the more we learn about each other, the less we allow stereotypes to live in our space, right? And just to kind of follow up with what May had said, just the first thing, don't assume someone's good or bad at something because of their race, right? This is something that I speak about with, teachers that I work with all the time as well. And assuming that they have support at home as well, I think that's another stereotype that does come into play at times. And as an educator, just listen to your students, get to know them. They're sitting in front of you for 180 days, but I feel like you need to get to know them beyond the classroom, right? Not just for the 40 minutes that they're sitting in front of you, or however many hours they're sitting in front of you at the elementary level. And avoiding things, just like May had said earlier, things like you should know that, or wait, why don't you know that? Or this should be easy for you. Not necessarily, like I studied mathematics not because, like it was forced upon me. I just love math, right? I was never strong with language arts. I mean, and history, forget about history. That was definitely not my forte. So, everybody's different. I have friends who are, social workers. I have friends who, studied English. So everyone has their different strengths. So when you, apply these stereotypes or, indirectly or directly, it affects children, definitely. And I think for a very long time, not just at that time or in that instant, but it can definitely have an impact on them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I agree with what Jean said. We need to increase awareness of others, and the more knowledge about others, and the less we will dehumanize others, and then that will take care of a lot of hatreds and attack. And so, in classroom, there is absolutely an on-campus zero tolerance. And myself, besides, in content, I also launched a Surreal Circle. A couple of students here joined me. When the first lockdown started, we met pretty much once a month. It's as a small circle to help each other to share the experience, everyone had, and what should we do? And collectively, how should we react to that? And we can keep it quiet. We can pretend it's not here, but that won't take care of the problem. So it's exactly as why today we sit together and we will collectively looking for, reaction and solutions. And of course, we talk more about that in terms of, you know, classroom and reformation later on. Thanks.
Absolutely. It's so important. And, Jen, you said something about, those lasting impressions. And, I remember vividly about different experiences that I had growing up, as a young Black girl in school and, the things that people may say or looks that people may give or the lack of rigor that I may have been, engaged in because I was a Black child. There are so many things that happen in the scope of a day in the school that could either make or break a child's experience. And Joyce, I'm going to pose a question to you. You serve double duty in our district as a parent and as a school board member. What do you say to, and how do you empower your own children during this time when we see so much hatred and violence happening, especially since you mentioned earlier that you now have shifted to things happen and you say, oh my God, is this because of my race, right? You're now in a different thought process for yourself. So I can only imagine if you have that fear for yourself, of course, what fear do you have for your children?
So yeah, this issue just breaks my heart. I have 3 children, a 12-year-old boy and twin 9-year-old girls. And I just want to protect them and hold on to them and not let them see what's happening. But it's really important that they are proud of who they are. So at the beginning of the pandemic, just before we locked down and had started remote schooling, my daughters came home from school and, the media was using the term China virus. And there were young kids in school who said to them, "You're Chinese, you have coronavirus." These children are just regurgitating what they hear, but nonetheless, it is so difficult for 9-year-olds to hear it and then to process it. So I just continuously remind them that they need to embrace new experiences, be kind, be accepting, and just love who they are. And remember to stay strong and be them, right? And I hope that their relationships and friendships will help change opinions in the future.
And it's so important that we all remember that, I grew up in the times where it was, sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Well, we know that's not true. We know that names hurt. We know that comments hurt. We know that jokes at the expense of others hurt. And, it breaks my heart anytime that I would hear that anybody has had an experience, especially children, where somebody is doing something intentionally to harm them in the way of a joke or of a comment. Earlier on, May mentioned something about the model minority. So I'm going to ask Dr. Kong at this point, could you just provide some clarity of the concept for everyone? Share why the concept of the model minority is harmful to the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And if you could, just share some of the contributions that the AAPI community has made to American society that you wish was more widely known.
That's a great question. But again, I want to quickly comment on Joyce's, 3 kids. I have 3 little kids too. It's seriously heartbroken when you just imagine they can be attacked simply because their skin color. And they can be yelled, go back to China, although they were all born here. It's again, very painful. So the model minority, if people never know the history of it, you feel like Asians should feel good about it because you're a model. Then if you know the history, again, it's not that pleasant. That was around in the 1966, the sociologist from UC Berkeley, and his name is William Patterson. He published an article in New York Times called Success Story, Japanese American Style. But of course, this applies to all Asian and typical East Asian, not just the Japanese. So this became like a very representative voice to promoting the Asians' so-called industrial and also rule-binding characteristics, which is not in the context to praising Asian, but rather to stand against Black Americans, as which group are struggling in a lot of problems rooted in history. So how fair it is. And also people ignored a lot of time when we talk, look at, even in the data prove Asian success, it's not necessarily just because the race, it's because a highly selective procedure of those Asian immigrants. It's only higher educated, very successful Asians were granted visa or the entrance. And so this, people ignore those two issues. And then this is harmful because they only look at your, for example, stereotyped math skill. And even like a Jane achieved so much, they were downplayed. Oh, she's Asian. It's not because she worked very hard. And then this stereotype also hurt other people are not that good at math. And then, and also it covered the other contributions, as Tamika, you suggested, how Asian American and also the Pacific Islanders as a group contribute to the society. And that can have a long list, right? But now I constantly like to argue, what is Asia? You know, I think it's just so unfair just to call me a Asia and let me to represent the whole Asia. By the way, Asia, the land, has a 1/3 of the world habitant land. And the population wise is almost 2/3 of the population. And the language is hundreds of languages. And how could I, from that corner part of East Asia, representing the whole Asia? And plus, every time when we ask people, what is Asia? I'm sure people confused. Is Russia Asia? And how about the Jewish people? Like, how would they identify themselves, right? And then Turkish. So I think there is a really long way for all our educators, not just college and K to 12. As May, I totally echo the community support and all the members said that that's why they are here. And I'm so glad you guys are here. This is really a call for collective effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. One thing that I thought was really important when, Dr. Goldberg and I were thinking about, how are we going to pull a panel together? We need to have this conversation because it's so important to, amplify these voices, because I don't feel like the voices are always heard. And I think one of the unfortunate things is there's, some myths, and one being, Asian women are, very submissive, or Asian people are very, quiet and, or, stand back, and, all of these things, of course, are not true, right? To tie, this specific characteristic to somebody because of the race is, ridiculous, right? So I just want to give you all the floor at this time. Is there a specific myth about the AAPI community from your personal perspective that you would like to dispel? And we'll start with May, and then we'll move to Jen, Joyce, and then we'll finish with Dr. Kong.
So I would definitely say, well, first, as Dr. Kong touched on it, the bottom minority myth, but I think going maybe a little bit more into the community itself, but also like externally, is that the notion that someone is not like quote Asian enough, like gatekeeping culture. And I think especially for me, like as a transracial adoptee, like fortunately no one has ever said this to me, but a lot of my other transracial adoptee friends have experienced things where they felt like with other Asian students that they were kind of pushed away, or like they, just straight up said you're not Asian enough, or like you're too white or something like that. When I feel like, as Dr. Kong was saying too, like there's so many different experiences and cultures and languages, etc. within Asia. You can't just kind of say this is what it means to be Asian or to be Asian American, because then obviously you're excluding so many different experiences that don't fit into that mold. So yeah, I think just reinforcing that the community is not a monolith, and then also, you know, including those voices and experiences that aren't often centered. So like South Asian, West Asian, Central Asian experiences, as well as like different religious experiences. And I'd say for me personally, like transracial adoptee experiences, because there are a lot of people who are transracially adopted that are um, Asian, but you never really hear them being included in that larger conversation. And I've seen a lot of um, uh, transracial Asian adoptees kind of saying that they didn't, with the Atlanta shooting, saying they didn't feel Asian enough, or they felt wrong to be grieving that when, you know, we're all Asian, we all have that lived experience. So no one should ever tell you that you're not.
So I think I'd like to talk about how you know, the myth that Asians are considered obedient. My parents would probably beg to differ on that when it comes to me growing up. Um, but I think oftentimes, you know, because Asians are perceived as obedient, we're also perceived to be weak, right? And I think this kind of plays into why, you know, a little bit into why a lot of this is happening now. But I think people need to understand why we're perceived as obedient. I mean, there's a concept of filial piety in the Asian culture, and you know, it's very deep rooted, and you know, sometimes it can spill over into how we treat others as well. And but I think just because we have this sort of, you know, um, perspective doesn't necessarily make us weak. I think, in fact, it actually makes us more resilient because it makes us able to really endure a lot more and to keep moving forward. Although we might not be as vocal, now we are a little bit more vocal about it. But, you know, I think the fact that, you know, traditionally being considered obedient has often made us, you know, seem weaker or easier targets to other people. So
here's one. We don't all have tire moms and crazy strict conservative parents who only spend time with other Asians. My father is this avid extreme sports guy, and we've traveled the world hang gliding competitions and going to obscure beaches to windsurf. And they didn't actually expect us to be within the box. They wanted us to be independent and to explore the world. And you know, it was okay that I was never going to be the concert pianist or violinist. It was never going to happen. Like I could try and it just wouldn't happen. But you know, I think for my parents, they just wanted us to be the best us and try our best. And that what's really important to them is for us to remember our culture and where we come from. And that China's history is really important and that we need to remember that and then pass it on.
And I agree what my panelists said. And I want to just add another anecdote. A long time ago, I went to a Whole Foods shop, and then the person just walked to me said, "I think why the Asians so smart because you guys eat a lot of fish." And I said, maybe. I never thought of that. But then I really want people to know if they think Asian, again, is back to the model minority. And if they do buy it, I want to tell them is it because maybe we work harder. But that's again fall into another stereotype of, you know, model minority. And so this is a great question. and just being back forth to approve. There's so many stereotypes we need to break through, and it's a long way to go. Thank you.
I mean, it's so interesting how so many people will take a myth and try to paint a narrative of you, right, that is completely distant from you. And thinking of that, I'm thinking about identification, right? You know, we all identify in a specific way. When you think about government forms, or have you had any issues when it comes to getting people to understand who you are? And do you have any issues when it comes to race classification on government forms? You know, again, somebody mentioned the box, right? There's always this box to check, and the box is very limiting. What are some of your feelings about that? And that one is going to be open to anybody who would just like to jump in and answer that.
Well, I would jump then. So I think when for a long time I never thought of that. I said, oh, it's just a form. I'm Asia. There's only one choice, right? So I claim I'm Asia again, which is a interesting of unfair way to claim. But then again, inspired by this Black Lives Movement and also anti-Asian hatred, when I look at the form again, I feel like I'm so inspired and look at it differently. Now I saw the form is totally ridiculous. First, you have black and white. That's based on the skin color. And then there's a Hispanic, and then based on language. And so I asked, how about the people from Spain? Are they Hispanic or they are Caucasian? And then, and then the people from Egypt, they said they are Caucasian, but how about their dark skin? And then even ridiculous Asia, again, as I mentioned, it referred to a land, a geographical orientation. So in the small, tiny form, we use at least the 3 criteria, try to divide human. And that again proved is ridiculous.
So I agree with you, Dr. Kong, that it's, you know, when you go to, so my children are of mixed race. So now I look at the box and I say, Asian or white? I don't know. Can I tick both? But I just want to touch on like my identification of who I am is confusing. I am American. I'm Chinese. My parents are Chinese American. I was born in Guam, which is a US territory, but a lot of people don't know that, so that's confusing. I was raised in Taiwan. My grandparents fled China during the Civil War with my parents. So they grew up in Taiwan, and then they later immigrated to the US. So add all of that in, and we now have Americans, and it just throws everyone off. And everyone is basically, the first question people ask is, how come you don't have an accent?
Thank you both for sharing. I want to move into something that's something that I think is, you know, like the points of pride. You know, anybody who knows me knows that I love being a Black woman. You know, I celebrate it all the time. It's me, it's who I am. I'm proud. I love being me. You know, what is it about your race, heritage, culture that has shaped the person you are today? And what do you love or celebrate most about yourself? Because I believe people should celebrate themselves. So what do you celebrate most about yourself?
So I think this is me, right?
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't give the order. We'll start with Joyce, Jen, Dr. Kong.
So we just talked about identity, and it ties in really well. So I grew up in Taiwan. I went to the American school there. My friends were children of American and international expats, local Taiwanese, other Chinese American like me. I attended a boarding school in Massachusetts where I had a lot of international friends, and then went to college in Boston, which is like the quintessential college town of international and students and diversity. So while my parents have instilled culture and Chinese traditions to my upbringing, but I feel like what my takeaway is, I have all these other external influences that have shaped who I am. So, and so that all these influences have really allowed me to cross cultures with ease and not see people with a division of race.
So in terms of what I love and celebrate most about myself, it's something that I didn't grow up loving at first, but now I am very proud of it, which is my name, right? Because so traditionally, like in Korean culture, your elders are kind of charged with naming all the children that are born. And there's also like certain rules that they follow to kind of honor certain names. And on my birth certificate, it actually says Jin Hee, and then in parentheses, the doctor wrote Jenny. So I was given another identity. But so when growing up, you know, like I originally was very, you know, I didn't go by my Korean name. I went by my American name because it was just easier. I didn't have to explain it to anyone. But then as I got older and I learned more about my family's history and, you know, just learning more about my culture. And I think as much as my parents tried to instill those, you know, those in me, you know, they just didn't have the time to do it all the time, right? Because they were working 7 days a week, 12-hour days. They literally took one day off, you know, in the whole year. So a lot of things I learned later on as I got older, and it made me realize how much I actually really love my name and what it means. So that's the one thing I do celebrate most now is my name and the tradition that it comes from.
That's just so interesting because you look at my name, Kong, that is the same as Confucius. And I actually can claim I'm 73rd generation of Confucius. And it's just prestigious to have that, to carry it, right? But when I was a little, I hated it because the kids are all, you know, common names, behead me. And because that was the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution. And so I begged my parents, please change that last name. I can't bear that. But now it is this name. Give me a lot of assurance and affirm. And typically, you know, the Confucius, he's the number one promotion principle is a Ren. So basically, if there is two or more people, there will be a conflict. How will you solve it? Violence, gun, or fight? No, it's a love. It's a benevolence. So I think I'm totally buying this. I'm not just celebrating with all my family and the kids, I also celebrate it with all my students. And I will continue doing that.
I would say for me is, as one adoptee called it, self-racialization, which is basically where you, as a transracial adoptee who most are adopted by white parents, you basically have to teach yourself how to be a person of color and like what it means to be a person of color. And I think for me, I'm most proud of myself that I was able to kind of learn a lot about what it means to be a Chinese American and also what it means to be an Asian American, both in like a cultural sense and community sense, but also a political sense and like the history of it and what it means. And I think for me now, like I really strongly identify as an Asian American, not just Chinese American, because I've been able to learn a lot from so many different people who come from like all different Asian American cultures. So I feel like for me, just being able to create a sense of identity and a place within a larger community for myself, because it is really hard to do when you don't have anyone that looks like you where you grow up. You like have to teach everything to yourself. So I think that's what I'm most proud of myself.
Thank you all for sharing that. I think it's so important because sometimes it is hard for people to share what they love about themselves and what they celebrate about themselves, because that's also, people wouldn't know it now, but it's something that I had to grow into even for myself, because I figure if I don't celebrate myself, who will, right? It's an important thing. And I just want to touch on something that Dr. Kong said and Jen said about, names and the importance of a name. As an educator, I tell teachers all the time, names are important. Take the time to learn somebody's name. Don't give anybody a nickname if they didn't ask for it. There are some names that may, command more use of the tongue than others. Practice. If you're not sure how to say somebody's name, ask. And if somebody tells you that you said their name wrong, just be humble enough to say, I'm sorry, I'll practice, I want to get it right. I think a lot of people don't really understand how important it is that you make sure that you get somebody's name right, or not call somebody something that they don't want to be called. So I just wanted to make note of that. And I'm also taking note of the time. So for our panelists, we're going to skip the next question, and I'm going to actually give the last question to Dr. Kong. So much has been happening in the world, over the last year. Racism is not a new thing. It's something that more people are just currently paying more attention to. For some people, allyship has become performative from my perspective. It's for likes on Twitter or Instagram, but there, of course, are some people who are true allies and want to get in and do the work. And one thing that's, also frustrating for me is when we get into this war of who's suffering the most, right? All suffering is bad. And we all have to band together to make sure that we're driving out hatred and that we're being more kind. So I pose this question to you, Dr. Kong, as the last question for the panel before we take questions from our guests. How do you think we can all do better to address racial issues in an alternative ways?
It's a great question, and thanks for giving me this chance to elaborate on that. And I think we need, our future is lies in our students, and we are, and I assume most of our teachers, we're touching our future. So we really need to work on our curriculum. For example, to add a history of AAPI and area studies, and to teach children how to come from racism and address these issues. And then more importantly, we add more courses like world history, religion, philosophy, literature, and then to, again, as I said, increase the appreciation of value of interdependency, to realize there's no isolated culture. We all rely on each other. And then more importantly, to aware, as you just, Dr. Pauling said, if we made a mistake, we accept, I'm sorry. And now I think our culture is toxic, as I mentioned before, because at the moment I think I'm the one suffering, I realize my Black friends suffering. And for since the moment of this country were born. And then I realized my Jewish friends suffered, and because anti-Semitism. And I realized the Muslim could suffer because 911. And I realized the gay people suffered. And then I realized when the defund the police movement started, I saw white male scared to go outside. So that means we live with a fear in one's country, that one, including every one of us. So we need to change the culture. So that to me, I want to promote that kind of love and kind and humanity-centered culture. And I just want to give us one example. There is a philosopher called Mencius. He was a disciple of the grandson of Confucius. He said, let's love our seniors and extend love to all the seniors in the world. And let's love our youth and extend love to all the youth in the world. And that is the society we are willing to claim this in my country. And so that is something I really and feel hopeful, because like you, like Dr. Goldberg and Dr. Pauling organized this panel, and everybody enthusiastically joined and listened. This gave me the hope and that we can together work toward that and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. You know, one thing I do often, because I'm always stuck in traffic, is listen to music. And I have full-on car concerts where I'm like singing at the top of my lungs and I don't care who can see me. And one song I listen to all the time is Let's Go Crazy by Prince. And the very first line when he says, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life." That's what we're really here doing, right? We're here trying to get through this thing called life together. And it would be so much better if we all just do it together by being kind. And I hope that, you know, those of you who joined us today learned something new, experienced something new, heard something different that you can take with you. And I ask that you not just take whatever you learned and keep it to yourself, but share what you learned from this discussion today with at least 5 different people, because we need to make sure that the reach goes beyond just the people who are in the squares who are here with us today. So I definitely want to thank our panel. You were amazing. Thank you for being giving of your time, being given of yourself, and being vulnerable so we can learn and grow from you. And at this time, we will open the floor for questions. Don't be shy.
I have a question. During the pandemic and during the Black Lives Matter movement, um, I had seen a lot of not advertisement, but people on social media and stuff were basically expressing how like Black people were expressing how they were a little bit upset at the Asian community because some Asian like some people from the Asian community and just certain communities were kind of backing the brutality because they didn't necessarily understand why it was happening. And so I was wondering, like, when you have two different sides, you have the Asian community and Asian Pacific Islander community, and then you have other communities, and then you have like a Black community. Like, was there any type of expectation that people had of you guys to where it was like you had to speak up about everything that happened throughout the time, especially including the protests for Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate? So I wanted to know, how did you guys navigate that?
I guess I can take this one or offer my perspective on this. So as a college student and as I guess now this semester, the co-president of our Asian American Student Union, like something that we really tried to do is emphasize like cross community solidarity rather than pitting each other like against each other, like with the model minority method, like using Asian Americans as a wedge between like the white people and the Black community. Like I think instead of, I've seen that a lot too online where people would say like, hey, why aren't you showing up for Stop Asian Hate with the same energy as like BLM or like vice versa? And I think that's really, really not unproductive, but just not a good way to go about it, because it's like, it's something that I was just started learning about, is like the fetishization of visibility within white supremacy, and like kind of where you're all vying for attention. Whereas it's like you don't need someone to see your struggle or your trauma or your hurt in order for it to be valid and in order for people to help you like work through it. So I think for me, what I've been trying to do to like address it is, I personally have never, because I didn't grow up in an Asian family, I didn't really have that anti-Black sentiment. So I can't really speak from that sense of like anti-Black bias from family. But I know within the larger AAPI community, there is a lot of anti-Blackness. And I think working to understand how, in my opinion, once the Black community is liberated and empowered, we all will be. Because racism is like rooted on the shoulders of Black people, and everything was built around that. So I think understanding how, like, you know, instead of like you know, calling out like other like API when they say like, oh, like Black people are so lazy, or like they're stealing all our jobs, like that kind of thing, like call them out on it and say like, no, we need to work together on this. Like we're not like I saw something that said like stop fighting with your black and brown like brothers and sisters. Like we're all in this together. So that's my take.
Thank you so much, Aviana, for your question, and thank you, May, for your response. And, I'll just echo that we are all, again, hoping that we collectively come together to just drive out hate wherever it comes from and whatever it looks like. Dr. Goldberg, do we have time for one more question, or are we at time? Is there one more question by anyone who's a guest before we close out?
Perhaps there's something that just I'd like to say, and I'd like to thank you. Oh, no, there's a question from Caitlin.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Here, I can read it out loud.
Oh, it's in the chat? Okay.
Yes. I want to fight against Asian hate instead of fearing for my family. Where can I start?
I put a link. This is in United Chinese America, a very active and a very devoting organization. And then they organized many events since, beginning of the COVID. They also help, the 7 Chinese women, Asian women shot to death at the Atlanta shooting. And they organized the funeral to help one of them because she has no family. She had no family. So they helped to bury her and have a ceremony. So you can join that organization, and there are a lot of things you can do. And I'm sure eventually the local school district and the Kean University will lead on this and do more. But thanks so much for express your concern and willingness to serve.
Thank you so much for that question and that response. I want to, again, thank you all for being here with us. We're never going to solve all the world's problems in an hour, but if nothing else, this was a start of the conversation that we hope that you all continue in your daily walk of life. So again, thank you for being with us. And we appreciate you spending time with us this evening. And again, thank you so much to our panelists and always Kean University, especially the Diversity Council, for always working with us to put on such great events. Have a good night, everyone. Oh, will the panelists stay on for just 2 minutes as everybody exits? That way we can just debrief a little bit. I'm sorry, Dr. Goldberg, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say thank you so much. And that I have to say, Jin, your comment about finding pride in your name as you've gotten older is similar for me. I grew up, I was named after a friend of my mother's who lived in Israel, and we're not Israeli, but that was where she lived. And my whole childhood and even my adulthood, everyone says my name incorrectly. And, I've learned to brush it off. I still respond. But there's part of me growing up that was very ashamed that I had a name that was different. And it's only been in the last few years that I've come to realize that, no, I have a really pretty name. I have a pretty name and I have a unique name that has a story behind it. And so thank you. It's validating sometimes to hear that, from other people. So thank you for sharing that. And just thank you everyone for being here tonight. If you are a student, I will make sure that you receive your co-curricular credits, and educators, you will receive your PD certificate soon. So thank you so much.